My pal David Curley is standing by. David Curley's Full Throttle newsletter available to you, talking about anything that moves. We got a couple things to bring up to you, but before we get to the seemingly failed moon mission, give me some thoughts on what's going on with the Alaska Airlines flight and if people ought to be worried.
It's we've learned a lot since yesterday. This was a plug door because they didn't need the emergency exit. It blew out at 16,000 feet. The NTSB seems to be narrowing in on 2 bolts. There are 4 bolts that hold that door from moving up or down, and 2 bolts on the top they have not found, and there was a fracture there. Something broke. Why did it break? How did it break? Were the bolts not put in tight enough? Not there at all? NTSB asks. And now the main 2 airlines that have the majority of the 171 planes that have these plug doors are Alaska and United. And both said yesterday when they did their examinations of the plug doors that they have, that they found issues. I think United, CBS is reporting 5 aircraft had loose bolts, and Alaska is saying there was loose hardware issue. They're not being any more specific than that. So the entire fleet that does have the plug doors is being checked now to make sure those bolts are good. The FAA has just released yesterday the protocols. So there's a chance that some of the airlines may have to go back in if the protocols are beyond what they'd already done with their checks. But you'll see probably these planes getting back in the air, I would say, in the next few days or so, once all those checks are made. So the bigger question is, was this a one-off that somehow either at the factory, which is a Boeing subcontractor, used to be a Boeing plant, but for 20 years nearly now, it's been a standalone company, Spirit Aerospace in Topeka, Kansas. Did something happen there? Or did Alaska Airlines do maintenance where they had to open the plug door and close it and it didn't get closed correctly? Or were there a problem with the bolts and what the bolts were made out of? And so there's a wide array here. As the NTSB chairwoman said yesterday, something broke. We need to know why and how.
So, David, it's my understanding when you have these door plugs, or even if it is an emergency door, when you're taking them off, they come off from the inside, and this one sort of flew out. And is that just because of the bolts that were missing or loose and the pressure pulled it out? And
so it's a little different system. The plug door is different than the door you walk in and out of when you come into an aircraft. It basically, there are on each side, there are 6 what they call stop fittings. And so the door comes in. Basically, you slide it up and into the cabin, and those stop fittings, the ones on the plug door, rest on the frame ones. So that keeps the door from moving out. And then because you had to move the door up and in to get those fit, you put these 4 bolts, 2 on the top and 2 at the bottom, to keep the door from moving up and down. So you have 2 systems for the 2 types of motion that could happen. Somehow this door moved up and then got away from the stop fittings and then fractured the area that it was in and blew out.
Why do we have the plug door? What's the purpose of it? Why
because
is it
they
there?
configure the planes differently.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
You got it. So if you have a certain number of passengers, this aircraft, the 9, is a stretched version of the 8. It can take over 200 people. And if an airline decides that, no, we're going to have just 170 or 80, whatever the number is, I think it's right around there, then they can plug that door because there aren't as many passengers that have to get off the aircraft. They can be served by the other emergency door, so you don't have to do the maintenance.
So you buy the airplane
and you configure
and you may have a different need than another airline that buys the same airplane, and they've got a template for that model.
There are about 200, I think there are 209, 210 of the 9s that have been delivered so far around the world. 171 of them have plug doors.
So it's basically a flying conversion van. I mean, it's VW's The Thing. It can turn into many different things. Right. No, it seems the fix is obvious. And that's customization.
Yes, don't have the door on the
order.
Yeah.
Well, the fix might be more simple. The fact that whether or not these bolts were put on correctly, or whether there's some kind of problem with the bolts and the material that was used to put them on. So the bolt goes on, and when there's a cotter pin or some kind of, that you've seen these before, where you put a bolt on, it's got a hole through the bolt, where you can put a cotter pin through the nut to keep it from spinning off. So the question is, what was wrong with this? What happened with those bolts on the top of this door? And once again, this could be a one-off. It could be a fleet-wide Boeing problem too.
It's endlessly concerning, but here's the bottom line. I remember a stat a few years ago from Boeing that, and it's just an average number on the aircraft that Boeing makes, 3 million parts on an airplane. Not
flying in close formation.
3 million parts. So the idea...
Imagine that in a Lego box.
The idea that Phil out on the tarmac with his screwdriver is going to be able to make sure every bolt and nut is tightened between flights, it doesn't happen that way. So these go in for maintenance where everything is checked head to toe. But it's, the question is how often is the maintenance schedule need to be changed, all those things. So there is a certain amount of trust and just believing that things are going to work out that you got to go with. When something like this happens, and thank God nobody was killed, when something like this happens, though, the airlines all go crazy for safety for a period of time. Not that they're not in general, but they go really, really crazy for it. Everything gets checked. Safest time to fly is this week. Get on a plane right now.
It's extremely safe to fly right now. I mean, think about when's the last time we had in the United States a serious aircraft mishap? I think it's been a decade. Where we've had a fatality in the United States. There are procedures. I mean, even your car, when you take your car in and they change your tires and their wheels, that there is a spec for what you have to tighten that wheel to, and you use a torque wrench to get it right. Something was wrong here. Either the bolts weren't on correctly or there was something wrong with the material. And the question is, did it happen in the factory or did it happen at Alaska Airlines? And that's what we don't know yet. And we don't know specifically what happened to those bolts.
Stand by. What happened to the moon mission? First off this, and then we'll tell you how you can get David Curley's Full Throttle. You got to subscribe. I do. And we'll tell you how to get it for a brand new year. My friend David Curley writes Full Throttle. You can get it anytime. If it moves, he's writing about it. How do we get it?
David Curley. It's Kerley, one word. .substack.com.
David,
it's simpler.
David
Easy.
Curley at Substack or David Curley
.substack.
David Curley .substack.com.
Or you can Google up David Curley Substack and it'll come right up.
Yeah, unfortunately, you can also Google up David Curley Party Clown because that was an old career he had, and I booked him for most of those. All right, so
I learned from the best.
Yes, you did. We thought we were going back to the moon. And I got to tell you, I brought this up earlier, but when I heard this is a rocket company in Pittsburgh, I went, I don't know that we're getting to the moon.
We are going to the moon.
But this particular rocket that launched from this Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania company apparently is off target and headed directly for the sun or something like that.
So two things. The rocket that launched it early yesterday morning was very successful. That's made by a company called ULA, which is a joint venture between Boeing and Lockheed. It's the Vulcan Centaur. It actually worked. Everything worked. Not actually. It worked exactly as it was supposed to. And it delivered this spacecraft into orbit. And then the spacecraft was on its own. It's called a Peregrine. It's by a company called Astrobotic in Pittsburgh. Had 5 NASA experiments on it, as well as dozens of other experiments. Well, not a dozen or so plus other experiments from other countries and other companies. So the rocket got it into orbit, and then its own propulsion system, the Peregrine's propulsion system, failed. It had a fuel leak, and the thrusters were going massively, and they were trying to get it to point toward the sun, Steve, and they were losing their battery too because they were on the wrong trajectory. They finally turned it a little bit so that its solar rays were looking at the sun. They have not completely said we're dead, we're done, it's a failure. they're still trying to get as much science as they can. It's not going to land on the moon. But another company is going next month. So this is all part of NASA's plan to commercialize trips to the moon. Happy to talk about that more, too.
How much does it cost to insure my rocket? Point being, you got this company in Pittsburgh. I assume that's probably Carnegie Mellon or somebody, right? Somebody from there? I don't think of Pittsburgh as a rocket.
I'm not sure they have a lot of them. They were very proud. The CEO was extremely proud that Pittsburgh was getting on the map.
Yeah, no, he should have
space
until this happened. But, you're a company that does this. You've got to ensure that things could go badly. That insurance must cost a gazillion dollars.
Yeah, I'm not an insurance guy. I've got a buddy who's from Chicago who's in the insurance business. I'll have to ask him. It was actually, as missions go to the moon, this one was relatively cheap, which is part of the reason NASA's doing it. They just want the ride. They're not running the mission. It's not their hardware. They're not doing anything. They're just putting experiments on it. And I forget the cost now. I think it was like $1.2 million for a kilogram delivered to the moon. I mean, it's kind of like your DHL or your FedEx. It's like,
right.
Okay, that's going to cost X number of dollars to get it to the moon.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, I mean, you got the collision and comprehensive. You have to keep on your insurance policy for your rocket. I mean, there's a lot going on.
The one photo that the Peregrine sent back, I can't tell, and they have not shown us exactly what's what, but it looks like there's some dents and some bends that aren't supposed to be there. So who knows what happened in launch or when they turned it all on to kind of go. It's pretty sad. NASA's 5 experiments were the majority of them were trying to figure out, is there water? Is there hydrogen? All those things that they want to know so humans can stay longer on the moon. Because if there's water on the moon, you can break it down to hydrogen and oxygen, something to breathe, something to drink, and hydrogen is fuel, something to get you back home. So all those experiments appear lost. And the next company, it's a Houston company that's going in February, has 5 other NASA experiments looking at different issues, not so much water and whatnot. So we lost some experiments that will undoubtedly go up on another lander at some point. But this is the quickening pace of going to the moon. Very hard to land there. Not a lot of folks have done it. And a couple of companies really want to.
You know how much I believe in space travel, space exploration, and the good that comes out of it.
Yes.
But re-explain, if you would, why it's important to have a moon base such that it is going forward, why it matters.
Well, what NASA believes is that to extend our discoveries and our exploration further into our solar system and beyond, you need to learn how to live on these unhospitable bodies. So the moon is basically kind of kindergarten for us. It's a place to go learn how you can live on a place like this without, ships coming every week or month that provide you everything that you need. So can you grow your own food? Can you create water for yourself and oxygen and all the things that you need? So the moon is it's basically a petri dish for us to learn how we can do that and then go to Mars and then go beyond.
So even though it was disappointing, it's still a learning experience for the next one and doing the commercial flights to the moon, which then ends up being a good thing. But David, you talked about how much money it would cost to send something like your own DHL, and it was, what, $1.2 million?
I have to go look it up, but it was something like that.
It doesn't include the bubble wrap.
No, but some of the things on board, a chip of rock from Mount Everest, toy cars from Mexico, and ashes and DNA from a deceased space enthusiast.
Oh, yeah, you're opening up the old, the big box of controversy. Yes.
Well, you got to pay for the rocket.
Company.
You got to pay for it.
Right,
yeah.
But all those things go up.
And it created some controversy. The Navajo Nation was unhappy that human remains were on board that spacecraft and were going to go to the moon because they hold the moon as a sacred place. And I mean, that went all the way up to the White House. So, yeah, you're not, as Steve saw, as I subtitled my piece, this is not your father's NASA.
Yes.
This is not NASA running it. You've got a commercial company that's going. And I will say Astrobotic, it's one of the reasons they haven't declared this mission dead. And I thought this was pretty telling. They're trying to keep this alive, get as close to the moon as possible, and do as much science between, their problems yesterday and when they finally have to say, we've lost contact and it's dead and it's gonna crash into the moon or whatever. So, yes, you learn something every time. Jane, think about this. 10 years from now,
Mhm.
there might be landers landing on the moon once a week.
Yeah,
You remember how cool the space...
could be. It could be us going there.
Well, the space shuttle was an insanely unique and cool thing. And then we got to a point where we were so bored with it that we barely paid attention. Same thing with Apollo.
You get
at the
over
point.
it.
So it will become routine. But there's so much more to talk about here. And, of course, no time to do it right now. But
Well, let's go back to the 737. How many times do you talk about a 737 landing and taking off?
never.
And think about 70, 80 years ago. It was a big deal to fly on a jet.
It's a true story.
It's still a big deal. I don't know how that big piece of metal gets up there, but I believe
It's
you.
remarkable. Yeah. I mean, Miranda finds it remarkable that I'm still upright and moving. That's a different thing. But movement is part of what Curly does. Hey, listen.
I really would like to talk about salmon sperm. I have some experience.
Jeez. Listen, that's between you and Jane. It's a
Have
call
some
after the show.
experience.
Thank you, buddy. Get David
My
Curley,
pleasure always.
Full Throttle, Kerley. It's on Substack. Just Google that up. David Curley,
Thanks, Dave.
Substack, Full Throttle. Subscribe.